Welcome to the AgCulture Podcast, where we cultivate tomorrow by inspiring agripreneurs and ag innovators through real-life perspectives in agriculture. I'm Paul Windemuller, your host on this journey of exploration and growth. On today's episode, we had the privilege of having Jodie Redcliffe from New South Wales, Australia. She has a long career in farming in Australia, including in the poultry, beef, and agritourism sectors. But that's not why we have Jodie on the episode today. Jodie is also the CEO of a unique organization in agriculture called Nuffield International in Nuffield, Australia. And I will be doing a deep dive with Jodie in today's episode about what Nuffield is and how for the last 70 years it has continued to shape leaders around the world in agriculture. I will be having many guests in future episodes that are past and present scholars. This discussion would be a great opportunity for you to get some background on this amazing network of agricultural leaders. So take a listen, and I hope you enjoy this episode with Jodie Redcliffe. All right, today we have Jodie Redcliffe from Nuffield International on our episode today. Welcome, Jodie.
Hi, Paul. How are you?
Good. And you're coming to us from Australia. What part of Australia?
Yeah, so there's a bit of a delay. Hey, maybe that's because I'm so far away. I'm on my farm. My husband and I have a farm in northern New South Wales. So we're about 9 hours north of Sydney, 2 hours south of Brisbane, and about an hour and a half inland from Byron Bay. If anyone's heard of Byron Bay, that's where Chris Hemsworth lives. So that's sort of our claim to fame.
All right. And you are the CEO of Nuffield International as well as Nuffield Australia. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. I've been in this job for about 5 years, a bit more.
So what led you to Nuffield?
It's a long story, so I hope you've got a bit of time. But
we got
basically, what happened was great. I've been married for 36 years as of 2 days ago, so that's kind of part of the story. I grew up with a grandfather that was a dairy farmer on the New South Wales-Queensland border. And my dad was Department of Primary Industries. So that's kind of the Queensland Government Agricultural Extension Service. So I grew up, we moved around the state of Queensland following Dad's job. We're in various different country towns. And Dad's specialty was intensive industries, so particularly pigs. And he didn't really much like chickens. And then I happened to marry a chicken farmer. And so I married Wayne when we were both quite young, and he was the son of a chicken farmer. And then over the course of our married life, we, grew up on the chicken farm, raised our kids, and eventually bought the business off Wayne's dad. And we had the business for 17 years before we eventually sold, but I'm jumping ahead in the story. So what happened was we were banking with Rabobank. So Rabobank it's actually the world's biggest agricultural bank, and they're based in the Netherlands.
Yeah.
And our bank manager was really, really instrumental to us, I think, as young farmers and understanding what our future might look like, because he would sit with us around the kitchen table, as your bank manager does, and say things like, right, what are your plans for the next 10 years? Have you thought about succession? Have you talked to Wayne's mum and dad about what's going to happen with the farm? And he really encouraged us to make those hard decisions fairly early. And going through succession, as most family farms would know, is not easy. Even if you get on like a house on fire, it can be really tough. So anyway, so we were farming. So it was a broiler farm, broiler chickens, similar to what happens in a lot of parts of the world. We were contracted to a company, and we did that for a very long time, raised all our kids, as I said. So we've got 3 kids. The eldest is now 32 and the youngest is 25. So one day our bank manager was visiting from Rabobank, and he said, have you ever thought about applying for a Nuffield Scholarship? Hadn't heard about it. thought it was interesting, went and Googled it. We did have Google then, probably only just, and found out about it. At the time, our kids were young. They were still knee-high to a grasshopper, and I thought there's no way I could do this and leave Wayne at home with the kids and the farm, and it'd be all too hard. But I kept it in the back of my mind. I just thought it was such an interesting opportunity. And then 10 years later, the CEO at the time of Nuffield Australia, who actually then became CEO of Nuffield International, fantastic fella that I look up to immensely, by the name of Jim Gelch. So Jim was at our biannual poultry conference, and I was introduced to him because by then I was president of the Queensland Chicken Growers Association and doing a lot of work with the chicken growers. And he said, you should do a Nuffield Scholarship. And I went, no, I'm too old now, because I was 45. And he goes, it's never too late, and don't let that stop you. So I applied, and I got the scholarship. So to say it was life-changing is kind of a bit of an understatement. The first thing was Wayne goes, what? You're going where? For how long? So, I've always been really mindful.
And that was in 2013, right?
Yeah, 2013. Yeah. So, it's really, it can be really tough. It's I suppose, personally confronting that you're putting yourself out there and doing this, but it's also really tough on the family at home. So, the good always comes with the bad, and you've got to work your way through lots of issues. So, so I did my scholarship in 13, was, absolutely amazing experience. And then, stayed involved with Nuffield. So there's a bit more to the story, I guess.
Yeah, and we'll dive a little bit deeper into that as we go along here. But
sure.
So most of the listeners probably haven't heard of Nuffield before. Could you give us a little background on the international portion of it, as well as the history of how it started?
Yeah, for sure. Because really the history is just tied up so much in the philosophy of what we still do now. So the name Nuffield comes from the founder, and that was Lord Nuffield. So he was an English lord. He was actually a fellow by the name of William Morris. And if anyone's familiar with UK cars, he had a garage called Morris Garages, and that's MGs. So the little sports cars, the sporty little cars called MGs, he created those and manufactured those. He also manufactured some cute little cars called mini miners, Morris Miners. This is, way back before the Second World War. So he was a huge car manufacturer in the UK. He also manufactured tractors. So a lot of Australians have sitting in the back paddock somewhere, Nuffield tractors still. They're sort of collector's items now. But the story was, before the First World War, he was a bicycle mechanic in Oxford in England. And then he really thought cars is the way of the future. He could sort of see what was coming. So he put himself on a boat and sailed over to Detroit so he could talk to Henry Ford. So he thought, who's making cars the best in the world? Henry Ford. So he went and saw what he was doing. He thought that was the best way to understand how to do it, to go and experience it and visit, talk to the man in charge. So then he came back, started his Morris Garages, mini miners, MGs, etc., etc. During the war, the Second World War, he converted his factories to armaments to help with the war effort of the British fighting Germany. And because of that, the Queen awarded him a lordship. So William Morris had to pick a name. He picked Nuffield. So William Morris became Lord Nuffield. When he passed away in 1963, he had no children, he and his wife, and he left all of his fortune to philanthropy in two different arms, medical research. So in the UK, there's a lot of, Nuffield medical research facilities, but the other arm was to agricultural scholarships. And that philosophy was he wanted farmers to go overseas, experience agriculture, take that learning back to their country, just like he had done learning to manufacture cars in Detroit with Henry Ford. So that's been the premise all along. So the Nuffield Scholarship is 15 weeks of international travel. Some of it is compulsory and set by us, and some of it is completely individual. You come to Nuffield with a topic, and if you're successful in gaining a scholarship, you're going to study that topic, and you'll find who's the best people in the world to go and talk about with your topic. And then you're going to learn as much as you can and bring it back to your farm and your industry at home.
So, what was your topic back in 2013 that you traveled around, and what were some of the places that you got to visit?
Well, I'm laughing because actually what happened was, always happens is Nuffield scholars, we tend to be quite curious people. We have lots of things that we're passionate about. But when I applied for my scholarship, what I thought I wanted to research was something that was a really big issue with the family farm, and that was finding bedding material for the chicken sheds. So we were using wood shavings, and that's quite expensive. And so I was hoping to find something else, and I knew there was some research going on in the Netherlands, actually, of different materials that you could use. The thing was, and I got my scholarship on that, once I started then looking into it a bit deeper, I thought it actually just depends what's going to be cost effective in your area. It's no good me finding something that's wonderful if I can't get it to my farm. So by then I'd started traveling with my Nuffield and talking to farmers all around the world. To me, everyone seemed to be worried about the same issue, and that was that people didn't understand agriculture. So I actually pivoted, and I did my research topic on improving people's ability to understand agriculture, particularly in the intensive industries, but now we've got an extensive beef farm. But again, I'm jumping ahead. So I completely pivoted my topic, and in hindsight, it probably suited me better because I don't have an ag degree. I've actually got a psychology degree. And so understanding how people tick and why people think the way they do probably suited me a bit better than understanding sawdust.
No, that definitely makes sense. So that's a interesting story of very entrepreneurial thing to do, right? You figure out you're going down one path and decide, well, I'm going to actually pivot because I think this suits me better.
Yeah, I mean, they say change is the only constant, but also change is one of the most difficult things to cope with as humans. We don't like it. We like to, get to know where we are and what we're doing and get comfortable. So it's actually pretty hard to put yourself out there and try something different.
Yeah, definitely. That's it's one of the things of somebody with a curious nature, right? If you have that curious nature and you're open to what may come along, you're a lot of times going to have better opportunities because of that.
Yeah. And again, that's one of the sort of the philosophies that we stand by, is that you don't know what you don't know, and you should be curious about lots of different things. Don't be closed-minded and go, well, that doesn't apply to me, or, that's not useful to me. You just open your mind to all different sorts of information, and who knows, it's going to make you a better person. Because a quote that I really like is, to be interesting, you need to be interested. So you need to be interested in what's going on, what other people are doing, just chat to people, and that makes you a more interesting person.
That's a great point. So what's the ultimate goal as a scholar in your perspective?
Yeah, that's a great question, Paul. I think that there's two prongs to it. One is, well, the fact that it's an experiential learning program. So it's not coursework. It's not a textbook that you're going to pick up and read it cover to cover, and then we're going to set you an exam on it. It's experiential. So you're learning almost by osmosis or by default. And so that's really important for your personal development. So the personal development is one side of it. And I guess it's a little bit amorphous. It's a bit hard to put a handle on it because we're not testing you with an exam. So that's the personal development. And then the other side of it is the actual facts, the knowledge that you'll learn. So as I said, the topic is part of your Nuffield. You can't just go around and learn lots of stuff and then not try and distill it. It is important to distill it into a report. Obviously, everything you learn is not going in that report, but there will be a topic that you write a report on at the end of your Nuffield Scholarship. And it's not an academic report. We simply want you to, as I said, distill what you've learned, to understand what you've learned and put it into some sort of coherent space. So, a 7 to 10,000 word report that can be read by peers in your industry, and that will be the knowledge that you've learned, as well as your personal development, that you've been able to improve yourself as you go along.
And the journey of Nuffield, I think you touched on it really briefly at the beginning there, but it really starts with a conference where all of the scholars that are currently enrolled in the program come together. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. So we start off with a conference somewhere in the world. It rotates around different countries. In March this year, so very soon actually, we'll be off to Brazil, to a place called Campo Grande, and we'll be having a conference there with 88 scholars from 15 different countries who have been awarded a scholarship for 2024. So, as I said, Nuffield started in the UK, but we have Nuffield organisations in 9 different countries, and then we have another 5 countries where we award scholarships under the auspices of Nuffield International, and then we also have delegates from countries that we're hoping to be able to award scholarships in the near future. So that's the start of the scholarship process, and that's the start of building a really worldwide network. And then after that, there is what we call a global focus program. So the global focus program is 5 weeks in a small group of other Nuffield scholars, so that the 2024 cohort, and that will go to 5 or 6 different countries over the course of the 5 and a bit weeks. So when I did my scholarship, we were in 35 different hotel rooms in 42 days. And we actually covered 7 countries in 6 weeks. So we started in India. We did India, Qatar.
That's impressive.
Yeah. India, Qatar, Turkey, France, Ukraine, and then both sides of the states. So Massachusetts, and then over to Washington State. Absolutely whirlwind trip. But the aim of that small group travel, again, one, it's personal development. It's learning to travel and communicate with people from very different cultures. And as you probably know, Paul, it's hard enough to travel with your family, let alone people you don't know very well. So it's a real experience. And then the other side of it is to expose you to global agriculture that you wouldn't necessarily know anything about. So as a chicken farmer, I knew next to nothing about cropping. So we'd be looking at crops in fields, and I'm going, oh, geez, is this wheat? Is this barley? I could tell the difference between canola and wheat. I've got that. But it was a real learning curve, and really, really interesting to expose you, as we talked about earlier, to things you didn't know you didn't know.
Yeah, that's a really interesting way of how the program's put together with those different components. I think that brings a lot of value over the whole program to build on many different aspects in your career.
Yeah, I might just add there, Paul, it's not just farms that we see, although, that's fantastic. And we love, going out in the field and getting dirty boots, because we're generally all farmers, primary producers, and we like to be outside more than we like to be inside. But apart from that, we go and visit embassies, we go and visit government agencies, we go and see, OECD in Paris, for example, or FAO in Rome, because it's also really important to understand global policy and how global agriculture runs, and how global trade and trade agreements are set. So all those things that underpin actually what you do on your farm is really important to understand. To understand that global agriculture's, it's pretty big, and it's, even though you might be sitting on your farm in, northern New South Wales, you're actually connected through supply chains and through policy makers to what's happening in the rest of the world. And these days, I think even more so, we're all concerned about food security. We're all concerned about our carbon footprint and how to make sure that agriculture is sustainable. So it's really important to understand what everyone else is doing.
Right. It's not just about what's going on the farm. It's the whole supply chain.
I just wanted to mention too that I've talked a bit about personal development, but I think that what happens with that and the goal that we see is that Nuffield scholars actually become leaders. it doesn't necessarily mean, you run for politics or you work for the nation's biggest advocacy group, but it means that you have a real confidence in what you're doing on your farm, and you're able to share that with people, which means you become a leader, whether it's the leader in your farm business or the leader in your community or more widely than that. So that personal confidence building and leadership capacity is a real outcome that we see from Nuffield.
Yeah, and that's one thing I was just going to mention too. Back in 2008, I believe it was, when I first heard about Nuffield, I was studying at Lincoln University in Christchurch, New Zealand at the time, and had the opportunity to meet several Nuffield scholars. And that's what really or got me curious about Nuffield was there. Everyone that I met that had been in Nuffield or that was currently in Nuffield, they all seemed to be a leader and seemed to be very engaged in what's going on in the industries that they were involved in. And that was one of the reasons why I always had that goal of someday I wanted to be a Nuffield scholar. And I guess I didn't really even mention it yet on the podcast. I was chosen as one of the scholars from the U.S. this year, of one of the 88. So I feel very honored to have that opportunity. And I'll be showcasing a lot of those travels on this podcast and through the social media platforms that we have associated with the podcast throughout the next year and a half as I go through that process. So I'm pretty excited about sharing that with everyone. My topic that I'm studying is artificial intelligence in ruminant livestock around the world. So I've had the opportunity already back when I was living and studying in New Zealand to learn more about the venison industry there, sheep and beef, as well as dairy around the world. Dairy's been my main thing, but I've been intrigued. I really enjoy working with ruminant livestock. So that's something that I've utilized in my farm is artificial intelligence. And I think there's a long ways to go there. And I think there's a lot of misconceptions about it as well that I would like to clear up. And also maybe some of them are issues that really are founded that need to be dealt with, right? That's one thing that I'm going to learn along the way, I hope. So.
Yeah. Things like data security, for example, is a big one in agriculture. Who are we giving our data to? But yeah, congratulations, Paul. It's wonderful to have you as a 2024 scholar, and definitely in your topic. There's things that you will learn from other industries that you'll be able to take into the ruminant industry with particular AI systems, I'm sure.
Yeah, definitely. There's going to be some crossovers there for sure. So I'm excited, very excited for it. So once the culmination of the program with writing the reports done, is that the end of it? As you're kind of graduate and then there's no other benefits to being a Nuffield scholar, or it just you're done with the program? What's that look like after you finish your report?
Yeah, no, you don't just ride off into the sunset, not at all. The scholarship portion of your scholarship is finished, yes, when you write your report. So that it's kind of about a 2-year window from when you're announced as a scholar to when you finish your report and present that somewhere, to a conference somewhere, or to a Nuffield conference. We don't have a Nuffield conference yet in the US, but hopefully we will. But I know some of our Nuffield scholars from the US have presented at Top Farms conference, for example. But when that's done, I know, well, certainly from the inside looking out, we know that our alumni remain very, very connected with the program. But then others from different leadership programs also tell me that how do you keep your alumni so engaged? The alumni is so interesting and interested in what's going on, and still remain. You can talk to you would have known, Paul. You talk to a Nuffield scholar, they might have done their scholarship 10 years or 20 years, and they will still tell you that it is one of the best things they ever did. I've unfortunately had to go to some funerals of Nuffield scholars, and it just blows me away that their Nuffield tie is on their coffin in the church as we're burying them. It's just a 2-year period that is life-changing. Yeah, so the alumni remain involved by events that we have. So we often get together for regional tours and farm walks and that type of thing. We also run a triennial conference. So every 3 years, somewhere in the world, we have a triennial conference. We've had them in Nova Scotia in Canada, in Brazil, in New Zealand. The next one's coming up in 2026 in Ireland. So that's a place where all scholars can come together. We have scholars that haven't missed a triennial conference and are in their 80s, and they
Wow.
mix with the younger scholars. And just to see that multi-generational interaction is just priceless. So we do, I would say, a really good job of our alumni remaining really involved with Nuffield.
That's awesome to hear. So, one other thing I wanted to bring up, just if you have any examples of the power of the network of scholars, any interesting stories from that you've heard, or big things that a scholar has done after being in Nuffield that they attributed to being part of the program.
Yeah, for sure. I guess I'm closer to the Australian example, so I might give a couple of those, although I'd also have some Brazilian examples as well. I mean, yeah, that is the amazing thing. You just hear the story of any Nuffield scholar, and it's so interesting. So, for example, one of our scholars in the UK, his name is Robbie Moore, and he's a scholar from, I think, 2016 or 18, not that long ago, off a family farm in York. And he and his dad actually pivoted their business to recycle shell casings, gun shell casings, because there's a lot of shooting in their area. They go on shoots for grouse and pheasant, etc. So all those shell casings that were non-recyclable, they've been able to create a system whereby that they can recycle both the metal and the plastic. So that in itself is an interesting business. But Robbie Moore, after he did his Nuffield Scholarship, ran for Parliament. So he's been a member of Parliament in the UK now for a number of years, 5 or 6. And when the Nuffield Scholars go and visit in the UK, Robbie's able to host us at Parliament and go through the Houses of Parliament, which, of course, in the UK is an amazing experience because there's so much history.
Right.
But just very recently, Robbie became a minister in the cabinet, the UK cabinet, and he's minister for what I would call environmental affairs. I may not have the name exactly correct, but, to go from a farmer, a Nuffield scholar, and now a member of Parliament in such a short space of time, he's an inspirational guy. So Robbie Moore. The story he tells, he came over to a conference here in Australia, Nuffield Conference in Darwin, and he caught up with one of his Global Focus Program buddies, who is Fred Appleton. And Fred's a cattle farmer from basically the middle of Australia, Western Queensland. And Fred had to do some mustering. So he said to Robbie, come on, we've got to go mustering. And mustering in Western Queensland means you go up in a helicopter. So it's a teeny tiny little helicopter with just 2 seats, and you go up and you muster the cattle from the air. And Robbie said when he got out of that helicopter, he kissed the ground. He could not.
He's not going back up again, huh?
Never, ever. That's it for him. One of those amazing experiences that you wouldn't get. And then another example, we have a scholar called David Johickney here in Australia. So we call him DJ because Johickney is a bit of a tough name to say. But DJ's been involved in advocacy and agri-politics for a number of years since he did his scholarship, which was back in sort of the 2000s, 2006 or 9, and has been involved in the Victorian Farmers Federation, which is the state advocacy body, and has recently been elected as chair of the NFF, so our National Farmers Federation, which is an amazing accomplishment. Wow. And, it was an area that DJ's been really interested in. So he's sort of pursued that, as Robbie had, that I guess, public service. Because generosity and reciprocity are tenets of ours, and sometimes that giving back is through public service. But then, if you've got time, Paul, I'll give you one more story. We have a scholar from Queensland called Jack Milbank. Actually, Jack's recently done a podcast here in Australia called Humans of Agriculture, because his story is quite amazing. He's a Zimbabwean, and the story of agriculture in Zimbabwe has been very turbulent, and his family farm was taken away from them. He immigrated to Australia. His brother still farms in Zimbabwe, and Jack did his scholarship in horticulture, and he's an agronomist and has run a number of different companies in the horticulture space, but has just been one of those entrepreneurs, and I guess Nuffield helps refine that a little bit. Jack and some of his buddies were on a ski trip to southern Australia after he'd come back from his Nuffield. They said, wouldn't it be great to own a brewery? So they did. They bought a brewery and started a brewery from scratch and produced fantastic beer. Within 12 months, his buddies weren't that interested anymore, so Jack bought them out, so he still owns a brewery. He's got his horticulture business. He's heavily involved in ag tech. Now he's got a cattle property, and he's importing African cattle genetics from Zimbabwe using his brother and his contacts, which is Thule genetics, Thule cattle. And he now is working to get those African genetics into the Australian northern cattle herd, because northern Australia is very much similar to the African savanna, and the genetics work really well. We've generally in Australia been using Brahman genetics, which is a Bos indicus breed from Asia. But yeah, there's so much potential for the African breeds to be crossbred here and do wonderful things for the northern cattle industry. So yeah, very interesting story of what he's been able to do in agriculture and just try different things and be successful in many areas.
Those are some people that sound like they need to be on the podcast here. So that's pretty cool to hear their stories and the innovation and public service that they have. So I want to switch gears a little bit. Nuffield, obviously you gave the story of how it started out and how it started being funded. What does that look like today? I know there's several public and private partners that are involved financially in Nuffield. Why are they involved, and what does that look like?
So going back to the history, the UK wasn't able to continue to fund, and they said to the countries where Nuffield was choosing scholars, sorry guys, funding's run out. You know, if you want the program to continue, you're on your own. And so Nuffield scholars, being entrepreneurial and, you know, never balking at a challenge, started raising money themselves. So, you know, here in Australia, in Canada, in New Zealand, in Zimbabwe as well. So the model that we use now is that we have investors that invest directly in a person, directly in a scholar, either one investor or a cohort of investors will invest in one scholar and follow that scholar's journey, and also be very helpful to them in their topic. So, for example, one of our really supportive investors is Nuveen. So Nuveen is the parent company of Westchester, which is the largest agricultural assets management company in the world. And the CEO is actually a Nuffield scholar, coincidentally, but obviously that's how they got involved with us. So Nuveen's one of Nuveen's arms, called TIAA, will invest in a Nuffield scholar each year somewhere in the world. Sometimes it's in the US, sometimes in Chile or Brazil, for example, and follow that scholar's journey through. Because they have farmland all over the world, they're able to connect that scholar into different places that might be interesting for their topic. So in the US, we have lots of different investors. So both governmental agencies, semi-governmental agencies, you know, local farmer groups, for example, places like Iowa Pork. I won't give too many plugs because I'll forget some people. But it's really important to us because, and I think it's really, I'm probably biased, but I think as an investor, it's such a good partnership, because we as farmers understand what it is every day to to get up when it's dark. I reckon when you're dairy farming where you are, Paul, it's dark and it's cold and it's snowy, and you've got to do what you need to do every day, day in, day out. And so for investors to understand that and then have the ability to connect to us, to ask us to talk about that, to ask real farmers what it's like to produce food every day is a really powerful connection. And so our sponsors, for example, Bayer is another one. They really like to be able to call on us and say, hey, have you got a Nuffield scholar that can come on a workshop or a panel to talk about the trials and tribulations and challenges of growing our food.
So if somebody's interested in being a partner with Nuffield or applying to be a Nuffield scholar, how do they do that?
They get in touch either with me, or we have a USA board, of course, and also through scholars. So we actually find that scholars on the ground, you chat to people, and that's how we find our best scholars, because you're chatting to people who are curious, and if they're curious people, they're the right type of people, and they'll get in touch.
Great. And to wrap up, if you were to sum up your whole Nuffield experience in one sentence, what would that be? I say the easy one for the end, right?
We always say, yeah, we always say you cannot describe Nuffield in one sentence, which is why, as I just said, our scholars are our best sort of advertisement, and the best way we find new scholars is tapping people on the shoulder, because it kind of takes a whole conversation. It's always an interesting conversation. The thing I didn't say is the farm that we have now is Angus cattle, but we also have some cabins. So we, jokingly say we farm people, because as a consequence of my Nuffield Scholarship, improving people's perceptions of agriculture, what we wanted to do for the rest of our farming career was take people one at a time, or families, and show them agriculture and talk to them about agriculture. And so at the moment we have some guests in one of our cabin, and they're a family of 4 and their puppy dog, and he's a high school teacher. And yesterday he goes, tell me more about this Nuffield. And we just chatted about what Nuffield was. And he goes, this is amazing, because you're connecting the knowledge. It's knowledge transfer and knowledge sharing.
Right.
And he's someone that's outside agriculture, but he can see that what we do is amazing. So what I would say is Nuffield is a 3-legged stool. You have passion and capacity and curiosity, and it's where those 3 things meet that's where Nuffield sits.
You want to give a little clarification. What do you mean by capacity?
Capacity to learn is what I'd say.
Okay.
Capacity to learn, capacity to improve yourself, but also just logistically, it's capacity to understand your business well enough to know that you can go away from your business and it will still survive. You put systems in place, and Paul, you're going to be looking down the barrel of this really soon. You have to leave your farm, but it's actually a good thing, because if you can get up on the balcony and look with a bit of space and distance back at what you do, it gives you some real clarity about what you're doing, why you're doing it, how you're doing it, whether you're doing a good job or whether there's some things that you need to tweak. So that physical distance and physically leaving your farm for an extended period of time is actually very valuable in improving your capacity.
Gets you to the point where you're not sitting in the middle of the forest looking at all the trees wondering what you're doing, right?
Exactly. Yeah, for sure. And it's tough. It's tough to go away for that long. It's tough to leave your husband. My husband missed me desperately, but it was probably good for both of us, And it's also tough to leave the business. You've got to make sure your staff are well trained. You've got to have all your procedures in place. Or if you're working for an employer, you've got to be having extra leave, etc. Your position's got to be covered. So, there's lots of things you need to put in place, but that's also a really great learning experience.
One of those things that makes you grow from the get-go.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. Great. Well, Jodie, I really appreciate you coming on today to talk more about Nuffield and your experience with it, and to discuss what I'm going to be looking forward to here very shortly. To wrap up here, how can people get a hold of you, connect with you, and learn more about what you're doing?
Yeah. I'm sure you'll put my contact details in the show notes, so thank you for that.
Yep.
But my name's Jodie Redcliffe, and my email address is jodie.redcliffe@nuffield.com, or you can look at the website. We have nuffieldinternational.org, and there's lots of information on there. So, please reach out if you're interested in learning more about the program.
Great. Thank you so much, Jodie, and we will talk to you later.
Thanks, Paul.
Well, I hope you got a lot out of the episode with Jodie Redcliffe from Nuffield International, and I hope that it inspired you to be more curious about what's going on around the world in agriculture. If you'd like to find out more about supporting the Nuffield organization or applying to be a Nuffield Scholar, please reach out to Jodie by checking out our show notes or by going to their website. Also, if you or anyone you know are working in the field of artificial intelligence and livestock, especially ruminant livestock, that's going to be my topic of Nuffield studies. So if you could please connect with me or have them connect with me either through the website AgCulturePodcast.com or directly through LinkedIn at my LinkedIn page, Paul Windemuller, I would really appreciate it. And that would give me a leg up to connect with more of you, to learn more on this topic, and to share it with you when I'm finished with my studies on it. And lastly, as always, please share this podcast with anyone that you think would find value from it. We will see you next time on the AgCulture Podcast.